March 13th, 2020 was the last time I stepped into school for a normal day of classes. It was the last time I saw my teachers and friends in person. Now, I only see my teachers through a screen. I only see my classmates as icons in meetings. And I only see my friends through FaceTime or socially distanced gatherings. I don't know what half of my classmates actually look like, and I haven't seen some friends in over a year now. I'm sure the same is true for many of you. For the past year, we have all become incredibly distanced from one another. Almost everyone I used to know is a stranger now. 2 years ago, this would have been an ideal environment. My sophomore self would have loved to stay home all day, hardly interacting with anyone. Now, I find myself wanting to interact with more people on a daily basis. And this is all because of one moment that led me to an experiment I never thought I would conduct. 2 summers ago, I visited a college on one of the hottest days of the year. Because of this, my dad and I stopped to get a drink at a vending machine. It wasn't working. We tried again, still wasn't working. During these attempts, I noticed someone was trying to get our attention, but I ignored him. He tried again, and I still ignored him. Did he need something? Did my dad and I do something wrong? After he called out a third time, I finally turned around. He explained that the vending machine had been working for a while, but told us where else we could find a drink. I felt incredibly guilty for ignoring him. I wish I had acknowledged him sooner. This moment made my father and I realize how closed off we make ourselves to the rest of the world. Was I really so rude that I would ignore someone who's just trying to help? Yes, I was. I knew my behavior was a result of my upbringing. From the time we were born, we were told that we shouldn't interact with strangers in any way, shape, or form. I'm sure you all remember the term stranger danger and what it meant. Growing up, my dad was always sure to tell me that I shouldn't approach other people and should be safe. I can clearly remember many cases where my parents would completely ignore someone trying to talk to them, regardless of what their intentions were. Because my parents tended to act this way as I was growing up, I ended up being the exact same way. Why, though, did they feel the need to instill this fear in me of other people? The answer: local news. Day after day, especially in Chicago, we hear about murders, robberies, raids, and any other dangerous events you can think of on local news. Chicago, however, isn't as dangerous as it seems. Out of 25 major cities in the U.S., Chicago is the 21st most dangerous. And, according to CNN, homicide rates were dropping for the 3rd year in a row in 2019. Why then does it seem that Chicago is this super violent city? It's because the media chooses to focus on it. Oftentimes, media not only hyper-focuses on it, but exaggerates the violence that occurs in certain communities, resulting in the mischaracterization of them. This ultimately leads to people having a false view of Chicago's safety, and I was one of those people. After realizing how closed off I was to the rest of the world and how disconnected I had become, I decided I wanted to make a concerted effort to talk to and connect to the people around me. I almost immediately regretted my decision. After all, it was a drastic change to my normal lifestyle. And as a shy person, slightly introverted person, it was even worse, because I don't normally seek out relationships with new people. When I do, which is very rare, I end up with a pounding heart and sweaty hands. That fear of rejection takes over. Despite this, I wanted to connect to people because I knew I was extremely disconnected, and I knew I was being more closed off than was necessary. This was terrifying. I had no idea where to start. Do I just walk up to somebody while I'm on the sidewalk? Do I just start talking to someone I'm sitting next to on the train? These options were not appealing. They pumped up my heart rate just by thinking about them. I had to start somewhere, though. And, fortunately, I walked right into my first opportunity. One night, when I walked my way over to the elevators in the building that I live in, I noticed somebody was already waiting there. Immediately, I began to think of things that I could say to him. I also told myself to relax multiple times and that I probably wouldn't see him again. When we entered the elevator, there was silence, where I considered whether or not I would actually say something. I had to think quickly, though, because I don't live on a very high floor. After it was probably 2 seconds, but it felt like years, I mentioned the weather. Anyone's willing to talk about that, right? We shockingly cool weather until we reached the floor that I live on. And as the elevator doors closed behind me, I realized I had found step 1. Ask a question about something within your immediate surroundings. At first, when I asked this man, "What do you think of the weather?" or when I told him, "Hey, it's really cold outside," I only did that because I knew it was small talk. I knew it was something people did to start conversations. Small talk, however, is just talking about things within immediate surroundings or that both parties have just experienced that both parties can easily relate to. I knew that by asking about the weather, I could start up a conversation without making him feel I was being too personal or too nosy. Now, when I talked to that man in the elevator, I actually jumped the gun. I didn't think about my safety first. He lived in the same building as me, which made him easier to approach. But how can we tell if someone is safe to talk to? This was a challenge during my exploration, because I know, as a young woman, there are many possible consequences to starting up a conversation with the wrong person. There are, however, less people we need to fear than we think. Many of us believe we shouldn't talk to strangers because they are dangerous. But the people we should be most wary of are the people we think we already understand. After all, they are statistically more likely to harm you. What I should have started with when approaching that man in the elevator was with what we can call step 0. Step 0 is where you identify whether or not approaching a stranger will have an impact on your safety. One of the best examples of this was when I had a conversation with a dancer I met at a competition. We were in a familiar environment that was filled with many people and was also monitored, so I knew I would be safe. Step 0 complete. I then asked her about when her team performed. This again helped me start up a conversation without making her feel I was too personal or too nosy. Step 1 complete. From there, we talked about many things related to the event. We talked about when her team performed, what style she was, costumes, etc. More importantly though, when I talked to this girl, we had something that connected us, and that was dance. This was important because it allowed us to talk about something we actually cared about. Sure, I could talk to the man in the elevator about the weather, but it wasn't something that personally mattered to either of us. This is what we can call step 2, where you find a personal connection outside of the atmosphere that helps you connect to the person you're talking to. Yes, I know this is nothing extraordinary, but it was an important step for me to understand when defining the process of connecting with a person. You have to reach beyond the atmosphere. You have to find something personal. Now, although the dancer and I had a more personal conversation, we were limited by time. Awards were starting soon, so we never got to anything more than dance. This made me ask myself, how can I have a conversation with someone like I am with a friend? I was practically gifted the opportunity to do so, but it was in a place I never really expected. Vending. If you've ever been to vending, you know there's a specific setup of your seating. There are 8 chairs set up around the flat top row, and if your party doesn't take up all the seats, you're seated with another party. My family decided to go there on New Year's Eve. We didn't take up all the seats, so we were sat with 2 other parties. One was a couple that had kids in college, and the other was a mother with her son. It was quite a busy night, so there was going to be time before we were going to be served or the presentation would begin. I decided I was going to talk to the mother immediately to my left. Step 0 was simple. I had my family by my side, and we were in a monitored environment. Step 1, however, took a little bit more time. Before I even said anything to her, I spent maybe 20 minutes debating what I would say. I was saying something in my head like, just ask her about how often she's been here, or just say something about New Year's Eve. I'm sorry to tell you that if you are a little bit shy, or if you are a little bit introverted like me, this part is always going to be difficult. I forced the words out of my mouth. I asked her if she had ever been to the restaurant before. She cheerily replied that she had been several times and always enjoyed the food. Step 1, complete. She then responded. She asked me how many times I had been there and what I thought as well. This lifted a huge weight off of my shoulders because I knew she was responsive. From there, we talked about about different elements of the restaurant. We talked about how chefs cram between tables to serve more people, we talked about food, and we talked about the presentation of it as well. From there, we built on that to find our first personal connection. We talked about where we had driven from to get to the restaurant, which led to us comparing the year's traditions with family. This was step 2. From there, we built on that. We talked about our year. We talked about our favorite memories, our best moments. This was step 3. Expand on a slightly personal topic to find other unrelated, but still personal topics. We covered many grounds that gave me a great idea of who she was. Her son even joined in on the conversation after I mentioned something he could relate to. This was easier for him because the mother and I had broken that conversational barrier between groups. Even my dad, who taught me how to ignore people, joined in on the conversation. After a while, all 3 parties were talking together. The fancy presentation in front of us was no longer just a way to avoid eye contact. I was no longer afraid of the people around me, and I knew how to connect with them. I felt I had made extraordinary progress at this point. I had discovered the 4 steps that it takes to form a connection with someone you don't know. Sure, I hadn't reinvented socializing or anything, but I met all the goals that I set out at the beginning of my journey. I reached this point by early 2020, early January, and had hoped to continue my journey up until May. The pandemic changed my plan entirely. By early March, I knew I was no longer going to be able to talk to strangers in the way I had learned to. With the inevitable fear of others and the use of face masks that came with the pandemic, approaching others became difficult. Face masks made looking welcoming and approachable impossible, and everyone was more afraid of the people around them than they had ever been. I knew I was going to have to wait a while until I could talk to strangers again. And I did wait. Near the end of 2020 and early 2021, when things began opening back up again, I took the opportunities that I had to reach out to strangers that I would see on the rare occasions that I would leave my house. I wanted to see how much had changed since the last time I had talked to strangers, and part of me missed connecting with them. I found that I, along with the people I met, were a lot more tentative. The 6-foot barrier that everyone was trying to maintain didn't help either. I had to be more forward than I had ever been before. I could no longer rely on just making eye contact or smiling to catch somebody's attention. There were, however, some benefits that came with talking to people post-pandemic and during the recovery. There were less people around, so I was able to more clearly focus on the person I was talking to. And we had face masks, which provided the comfort that the person I was going to talk to wouldn't really see my face. Talking to strangers is difficult, but if you can work towards making a connection with one person, you'll find yourself appreciating them and the people around you a lot more. As you've probably noticed throughout all of these stories, I always start with a question. I know, shocking. But once you start with that, it's much easier to build on what you're talking about, find more personal connections, and expand and get a great understanding of who the person you are talking to is. Now, you may still be wondering why reaching out of your comfort zone and going up to people is worth it. Originally, I was going to tell you that talking to strangers can add to your day in a way you wouldn't expect, just like the guy at the vending machine. That's true, but the pandemic has given us even more of a reason to reach out to others than ever before. We've all been staying in our homes, avoiding other people, and keeping our cameras off during meetings. We are more disconnected from the people in our lives than we have ever been, regardless of if they are a stranger or a close friend. We can't let that disconnection continue as we return to life as it was before the pandemic. Trust me, I know it's hard, but I encourage you to remember the steps I have shared with you today and the stories that I have shared with you today, and just how simple connecting with someone can be. I'm not saying that anytime you get the chance, you should spark up a conversation with someone you see, but the next time you're put in a spot where it's easy to talk to someone, maybe take advantage of it. Say hi, to someone you sit next to on the train. Or maybe say hello to me if you ever see me by a vending machine. Thank you.